What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking another look at the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G and going over whether or not it's still worth buying in late 2022. Now, this phone has been out for well over a year by now, and to make things even more interesting, its successor, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, is not only out now, but unlike this phone, you can actually get the A23 5G from a US carrier. But despite all this, the A22 5G still does seem to be a pretty decently popular device. So in this video, I want to revisit this phone and go over everything you need to know about it to give you a better idea of what kind of value it provides. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G, we're getting a 6.6-inch 90Hz TFT display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 399, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 82.3% screen-to-body ratio. So this is definitely a real nice display. At 6.6 inches, it is on the larger side, which tends to be a good thing when you're consuming a lot of content. And with a 20:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor here. So if you're doing something like watching videos in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And if you're doing something like reading, browsing the web, using social media, stuff like that, with an aspect ratio like this, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. And of course, the image quality is also great. With a 1080p resolution, everything looks real nice and sharp. And with a 90Hz refresh rate, while it's not quite as good as the 120Hz refresh rate you get with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, it's still above average, especially for a more lower-end mid-range phone like this. So the movement on the screen is going to be decently faster and smoother. So if you're doing something like watching videos, playing games, or even just using the phone in general, things are going to feel more fluid and just more premium overall. So overall, if you're looking for more of a mid-range phone that has a really nice display, the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G is still a great choice. For storage, this phone has 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, pretty much the same as the international version of the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, and in general, for most people, I feel like 128GB is going to be perfectly fine. Sure, if you're really a power user, if you have a bunch of apps and games and stuff like that, then you might be better off with 256, but again, remember, this phone does have microSD card expansion, and honestly, even in this day and age, 128GB is still a pretty good amount of storage. So again, for most people, as long as you're not really a power user with a bunch of different games and stuff like that, the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G is still going to have plenty of storage for you. Now for security features, as you can see here, this phone does have Face Unlock, and we also got a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So definitely a great spot for it, but let's go ahead and give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive there, no issues at all. And again, this phone does have Face Unlock too, giving us two different options besides a pin to unlock it. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So as far as features go, this phone has almost everything, but there's no macro camera. Now in my opinion, I don't really care about that. I wouldn't call a macro camera useless, but I personally never use it myself, and I feel like an ultra-wide camera is a lot more useful. So overall, if I had to choose between the two, I would definitely choose the ultra-wide camera over a macro camera, but keep in mind the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G actually does have a macro camera, so if you really want that feature, that phone might be a better choice. But in general, aside from not having a macro camera, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G has a pretty good camera setup. The photo quality is also really good as well. Sure, it's not going to be nearly as good as something like a $1,400 flagship phone, for example, but for what it is, being more of an entry-level / mid-range phone, I would say in general, the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G does take pretty good pictures. And for most people, if you're just taking photos for something like social media, for example, it will definitely get the job done. In addition to this, for video, this phone can record in up to 2K in the rear camera and 1080p in the front. Now, I'm not really the biggest fan of 2K myself. If I want to record in higher than 1080p, I'm just going to go to 4K anyway, which unfortunately this phone can't do. But I guess if you do want to record in 2K, then keep in mind, this phone can actually do it, at least in the rear camera. And with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, they actually took that feature away. So again, if you do want to record in 2K for whatever reason, the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G will be a good choice. As far as RAM and processor go, the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G has 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G processor. So on one hand, compared to its successor, the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G is definitely not quite as fast, but by itself, just for basic daily activities like browsing the web, using social media, streaming content like videos and music, and even playing some games here and there, the A22 5G is going to be perfectly fine, and I do think most people will get a good experience. Now, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, And here are the scores I got. So again, this is definitely not a slow phone by any means. In fact, even compared to most mid-range phones that are out today, the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G is still right at that level. So if you do want a mid-range phone and you want something that has really good performance, then this phone is going to be a good choice. But what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone's going to be an upgrade for you. Because depending on what you currently have, it may or may not be. I mean, if you're coming from a really low-end phone, then chances are this phone will be a huge upgrade. But on the other hand, if you have like an older flagship phone like maybe a Samsung Galaxy S10, then keep in mind while this phone is really fast for what it is, it's still not going to be quite at that level. But in general, I have done quite a bit with this phone, and I personally haven't had any performance issues. So overall, when it comes to performance, I really have no complaints here. Now for the battery, the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15-watt fast charging, so definitely a great battery here. Pretty much the largest battery you can get in the US, and if you're not in the US, it's still one of the largest batteries you can get. So if battery life is important to you, then you're definitely going to be happy with this phone. And in addition to this, while 15-watt fast charging at this point is really not that impressive, in my experience, the charging speeds are still decently good. So for most people, unless you're expecting like 25-watt fast charging or something, then you're probably still going to be happy with it. Now as far as the software goes, as of right now, this phone currently has Android 12, and it is going to get a couple more updates. So if you're wondering about Android 13, keep in mind this phone will at least get that. Another thing to keep in mind here is that unfortunately the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G does not have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, then you're probably going to want to go for a different device. For that matter, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G actually does have NFC, so at least I am glad to see Samsung moving in that direction. But again, unfortunately you can't do that with the A22 5G because this phone doesn't have NFC. But in conclusion, is the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G still worth buying in late 2022? In general, just as a random phone by itself, not considering any external factors, I do think this is still a really good phone that does provide quite a bit of value. But that being said, would I actually buy it compared to something like a Samsung Galaxy A23 5G for example, or even an A33 5G? Honestly, probably not. First of all, for me personally, I am in the US, and this phone is not even officially launched in the US, so between getting this phone on eBay and going to a carrier and getting the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G for probably a really good deal, it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Now that being said, for those of you in the US, if you happen to just get a really crazy good deal on this phone, then I could see it making a lot of sense because again, by itself, despite being over a year old now, it still is a really good phone. Now that being said, I'm not quite sure what the market looks like outside the US, so in that case, it really depends on what's going on with the A23 5G. If things are similar to the US market, then again, I would still say the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G, while still being a really good phone, is probably not worth it, just because right now it's still easy to get the A23 5G for such a good deal. But that being said, if you can somehow get the A22 5G for a lot cheaper than the A23 5G, and you don't really care about having NFC or a macro camera, in that case, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G is still worth buying. But honestly, realistically, I feel like with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G being out, that phone is really enough of a step up that combined with the deals carriers are currently offering for it, it really doesn't make sense to get the A22 5G instead. Now again, if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalip's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.